Somewhere in the Louisiana bayou, music drifts through the trees. A flashlight beam cuts through the darkness as someone runs for their life. And somewhere behind them, someone is hunting.
7 years ago, a woman was stabbed in the spine and left to die in the Louisiana swamp. The man who did it believed he had just finished his favorite hunting game. But he made one mistake. She survived. And now the bodies are starting to appear again. Welcome back to Murder Mitten Kittens Book Club, the podcast where things are cute, cozy, and extremely murderous. Today, we're diving into The Butcher and the Wren by Alaina Urquhart, a dark cat and mouse thriller that takes us deep into the mind of a serial killer and the forensic pathologist trying to stop him. This is a 2-part episode because there are 2 books in the series so far. Today, we're covering the first book, and next episode, we'll continue the story with the sequel, The Butcher Games. So grab your coziest blanket, give your cat a suspicious little kiss, and settle in. Before we begin, quick content warning. This episode discusses violence, murder, torture, and abuse as they appear in the book. Listener discretion advised. Let's get into it. Alaina Urquhart is the author of The Butcher and the Wren, published in 2022. Many people may already recognize her as one of the hosts of the widely popular true crime podcast Morbid, which she co-hosts with her niece Ash Kelly. And it just so happens to be my favorite podcast as well. What makes Alaina's perspective especially interesting is that she's also an autopsy technician in real life. Because of that background, she brings an incredible level of forensic realism to her writing. The medical details, the way bodies are examined, and the investigative process all feel unsettlingly authentic. So if you enjoy dark thrillers that feel just a little too real, this one definitely delivers. Now, before we dive into the story, here's your official spoiler warning. From this point forward, we'll be discussing major events and twists from the book, including the ending. So, if you haven't read The Butcher and the Wren just yet and want to go in blind, now is a great time to pause the episode and come back later. All right, kittens, let's crack open the nightmare. The Butcher and the Wren unfolds across 2 timelines that slowly spiral toward each other like a trap closing shut. In the present day, Dr. Wren Muller is a forensic pathologist in New Orleans. Her job is to speak for the dead, examining bodies and figuring out how someone died when they can't tell their story anymore. She's used to brutal cases. But the bodies beginning to surface in the Louisiana bayou feel different. And before long, it becomes clear that whoever is behind these murders isn't just killing people. He's sending a message. And that message is about to become very personal for Wren. One victim is discovered with a torn page from a book shoved down her throat. Gross. Another body appears with a paperback horror novel left beside it, like some kind of calling card. Even weirder. Whoever this killer is, he isn't just murdering people. He's performing. As more victims appear, investigators realize they're dealing with a serial killer the media quickly dubs the Bayou Butcher. But the most unsettling part? Some of the clues he leaves behind start pointing directly at Wren. And that's when investigators begin to realize something unsettling. This killer might not just know about Wren. He might already know her. Because 7 years earlier, Wren wasn't Dr. Wren Muller, and she once crossed paths with a man named Jeremy Rose. Jeremy lives deep in the bayou in a house that looks ordinarily enough from the outside. But beneath it was a basement where he kept people alive. Not because he cared about them, but because he wanted to study them. Jeremy isn't just violent. He's fascinated with anatomy, pain, and control. At one point, he calmly rips a victim's fingernail out, not out of rage, but curiosity. He wants to see how the body reacts. And when Jeremy kidnaps Emily, he decides to turn the entire swamp into his own twisted hunting ground. Instead of killing his victims right away, he releases them into the marsh at night. He gives them a flashlight, a head start, and then hunts them through the trees while music drifts through the darkness. To him, it's not murder, it's a sport. Emily and another victim named Katie run through the swamp while gunshots echo through the trees. Jeremy eventually catches them. Katie is shot and brutally killed. Emily is stabbed in the spine and left paralyzed in the mud, certain to die in the swamp. But somehow, Emily survives. And Jeremy Rose never forgets the one victim who got away. Back in the present timeline, the Bayou Butcher investigation becomes increasingly disturbing. Bodies begin appearing in elaborate, theatrical ways, hidden beneath festival stages, buried in shallow graves, arranged almost like grotesque puzzles for investigators to solve. At one crime scene, a victim is discovered buried alive with a smartwatch counting down beside her, like a timer. At another scene, Wren finds something even more chilling: her own business card. The killer isn't just leaving clues, he's playing with her. Eventually, the truth finally surfaces. Dr. Wren Muller isn't just investigating the Bayou Butcher. She's the woman who had escaped him 7 years ago. She was Emily. And the killer she survived is back. As the investigation closes in, Jeremy's behavior grows more reckless and violent. His obsession with Wren intensifies, pushing everything toward a final confrontation in the same bayou where the nightmare first began. After years of hunting him, it finally looks like the case is about to end. Police track down the man they believe is Jeremy Rose deep in the swamp. Gunfire erupts. Officers shoot him, convinced they've finally taken down the Bayou Butcher. Case closed. Except it isn't Jeremy. The man they shot is a decoy. Somewhere out in the dark Louisiana marsh, the real Jeremy quietly removes a bulletproof vest and slips back into the swamp. Alive, free, and already planning his next hunt. And that's where the story leaves us. Jeremy disappearing into the bayou, the investigation in chaos, and the Bayou Butcher still out there, somewhere. But what really makes this story work isn't just the twisted plot. It's the people at the center of it. So now that we know what happens, let's take a closer look at the characters driving this dark little game of cat and mouse. First, we have Wren Muller, who is really the emotional core of the story. Wren is a forensic pathologist in New Orleans. Her job is to examine bodies and determine how someone died. But for her, it's more than just a medical process. She believes every victim deserves to have their story told. And if they can't speak anymore, it becomes her responsibility to uncover the truth. But Wren hasn't always been Wren Muller. Years earlier, she was a medical student named Emily Maloney, until her life changed forever after surviving an attack in the Louisiana Bayou by a man named Jeremy Rose. By the time we meet her in the present timeline, the experience still shapes everything about her. She's constantly alert, careful about who she trusts, and deeply committed to her work. Her career becomes a way of turning something traumatic into something meaningful. What makes Wren especially compelling is that she never loses her empathy. Even after everything she went through, she still cares deeply about the victims she works with and the justice they deserve. And of course, that brings us to Jeremy Rose. Jeremy is the killer responsible for the murders that earn him the nickname the Bayou Butcher. When we first encounter him in the past timeline, he's actually going by another name, Cal. while attending medical school, which immediately tells you he's comfortable hiding behind different identities. On the surface, Jeremy appears charming and confident. He's attractive, intelligent, and capable of presenting himself as someone people naturally trust first. But that charm is just a mask. Underneath it, Jeremy completely lacks empathy. He sees other people as tools, subjects he can manipulate, experiment on, or control. Murder, to him, isn't just violence. It's something closer to a twisted scientific experiment. The one exception is Wren. Because she survived him, Jeremy becomes fascinated with her in a way he isn't with his other victims. Over time, that fascination turns into obsession. And as the story progresses, you start to see the calm control he prides himself on begin to crack. While Wren and Jeremy are locked in this deeply personal conflict, there are also people trying to stop him. One of those people is Detective John LaRue. John is one of the lead detectives on the Bayou Butcher case in New Orleans, and the investigation weighs heavily on him. Part of that pressure comes from the fact that his father was also a detective who worked the original case connected to Wren's attack years earlier. So for John, this isn't just another investigation. It's something personal. He takes every victim seriously, and the longer the killer stays free, the more that pressure builds. But outside of the case, John is one of the most grounded characters in the story. He's in a committed relationship and has a life outside the job, which helps balance the constant stress of the investigation. He also becomes one of Wren's strongest allies as the truth about her past begins to surface. Working alongside John is his partner, Detective William Brossard, usually called Will. Will is younger and still carries some of that early career optimism about law enforcement. He genuinely believes in doing the job the right way and bringing justice to victims. Throughout the investigation, Will often acts as a sounding board for John. When the case starts to feel overwhelming, he helps keep things moving forward and focused. Even though Will doesn't go through a dramatic transformation in the story, he proves how capable he is when the situation becomes dangerous, stepping in to protect Wren and helping bring the confrontation with Jeremy to an end. And then there's Katie. Katie is one of Jeremy's early victims, and through her, we begin to see just how cruel he really is. Jeremy manipulates vulnerable people, often luring them in with promises of drugs before trapping them in his twisted experiments. During the time Katie and Wren are both being held captive in the bayou, Katie becomes an important contrast to Wren. Jeremy constantly tries to manipulate the situation, pushing Wren to see Katie as weak or irrational. But Wren refuses to do that. Even when she's trapped in a terrifying situation herself, she still tries to help Katie survive. Katie's fate ends up being one of the most heartbreaking moments in the story, and it reinforces something important about Wren's character. Even when pushed to the edge, she refuses to lose compassion that defines who she is. And that contrast between someone who values human life and someone who treats it as disposable is really what drives the entire story of the Butcher and the Wren. And while the story itself is brutal, there are also some really interesting symbols woven throughout the book that add another layer to everything that's already happening. Some of them are subtle, some of them are honestly pretty disturbing. But once you start noticing them, they show up again and again and again. The first one is the smell of decay. This is probably one of the creepiest reoccurring details in the entire book. Every time that smell appears, it's basically Jeremy leaving his signature behind. There's a moment at the jazz festival where Wren notices it immediately. A sudden wave of decomposition hitting her before anyone else realizes what's wrong. That moment shows just how in tune she is with the work she does. Her job has made her incredibly sensitive to the signs of death. And of course, the smell eventually leads investigators straight to a body hidden beneath the stage. Later, the smell shows up again during the raid on Jeremy's property. This time, it's intentional. Jeremy unplugged the freezer holding one of the bodies, knowing that by the time police arrived, the decomposition would be impossible to ignore. Even when investigators are closing in on him, he's still manipulating the environment around him. The decay becomes almost like a calling card, proof that Jeremy has been there, and that he's still a step ahead. Another symbol that appears throughout the book is the spine. This one ties directly into Jeremy's obsession with control. At one point, Jeremy starts quizzing Wren on anatomy, asking her questions about spinal vertebrae, like he's giving some sort of creepy lecture. Except the lesson isn't theoretical. It's about her body. When Jeremy stabs Wren in the back near her spine, it isn't just an act of violence. It's symbolic of what he's trying to do. Take away her ability to move, strip away her autonomy, and completely control what happens to her. Later in the story, we see him repeat that same idea with other victims, deliberately targeting the spine before killing them. In a twisted way, it's like he's trying to finish what he started with Wren years earlier. Another small but important symbol in the book is the anatomically correct heart bracelet. It's a tiny detail in the story, but it represents Jeremy's fixation on Wren. The first time he notices it is during a biology lecture when he's sitting beside her, watching her take notes. The bracelet catches his attention, and when he abducts her, he takes it. And then he keeps it. For 7 years. So when the bracelet eventually shows up again during the investigation, it's not random at all. It's Jeremy sending a message. In his mind, Wren was never just another victim. She's the one person who survived him, and that makes her different. For Wren, seeing the bracelet again pulls her straight back into the nightmare she thought she had escaped. But Jeremy's obsession with her is also one of his biggest weaknesses. Because Wren survived him, she understands the way he thinks better than anyone else could. And that obsession is exactly what starts helping investigators connect all the pieces. And finally, there's the bayou itself. The bayou isn't just a setting of the story. It almost feels like its own creepy character. For Jeremy, the swamp is the perfect hunting ground. He describes the sounds of the bayou almost like music. The darkness, the isolation, the decay, it all mirrors who he is. He feels completely at home there. But Wren experiences the bayou very differently. She works with death every day because of her job, but she never becomes comfortable with it. To her, the bayou is suffocating and terrifying. Not just because of the bodies hidden there, but because it's where she was tortured and nearly died. In a lot of ways, the bayou is where the two worlds collide. Jeremy thrives there. Wren escaped it. And that difference between someone who embraces death and someone who refuses to be consumed by it is really at the heart of the entire story. And now, kittens, we have made it to our Claw and Order segment. And for this segment, I have opted to tell you a brief, and I really mean brief, story on who Dennis Rader, also known as BTK, was, since a lot of his psycho tendencies paralleled that of Jeremy's, our fictional serial killer. BTK stands for Bind, Torture, Kill, a really stupid nickname, by the way, that Dennis Rader bestowed upon himself. Real winner we got here, folks. He was a serial killer who murdered at least 10 people in Wichita, Kansas between 1974 and 1991. He targeted entire families and lone victims, binding them, torturing them, and then killing them, often in their own homes. What made BTK especially disturbing wasn't just the violence, but his need for control and attention. He taunted police and the media with letters, poems, and crime scene details, desperate to prove how smart he was and to make sure people knew he was responsible. After 1991, he stopped killing, but he never stopped craving recognition. Ugh, horrible, horrible person. Years later, in March of 2004, BTK resurfaced and began sending letters again, convinced he was untouchable. At one point, he actually asked police if a floppy disk could be traced. And this is where his ego really gets him. And spoiler alert, they can be traced. But the police had informed him no, he'd be fine. And he believed them. And he ended up sending them the floppy disk. And that disk contained metadata that led directly to a computer at his church, registered to Dennis Rader. How convenient. A church. Lovely. He was arrested on February 25th, 2005, and the man who thought he was smarter than everyone else was undone by his own need for validation. He later confessed to his crimes and is now serving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. BTK is a textbook example of how narcissism, control, and the desire to be seen can become a serial killer's greatest weakness. And that's what makes killers like BTK so fascinating and terrifying at the same time. And by fascinating, I mean morbidly fascinating. They believe they're smarter than everyone else. They believe they'll never be caught. And eventually, their own ego becomes the thing that exposes them. That same arrogance shows up in Jeremy Rose throughout The Butcher and the Wren. His obsession with control, his need to leave messages, his fixation on the one victim who survived him, all of it starts to crack. But unlike BTK, Jeremy doesn't get caught. And that's where the story leaves us. Jeremy Rose disappearing into the darkness of the bayou, the investigation in chaos, and the Bayou Butcher still out there somewhere. What a story. I truly enjoyed reading this book and learning about all these different characters and all the depth Alaina had bestowed on each character, which made the story feel like I was watching a real life discovery documentary. So, kudos to her. Thank you so much for bestowing this wonderfully morbid and disturbing book for all of us to enjoy. In the next episode, we're continuing the story with the Butcher Games, where the stakes get even darker and the hunt becomes far more personal. Until then, stay cozy, stay curious, and be wary of the scent of decay. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, share, and follow Murder Mitten Kittens wherever you listen to podcasts. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. You can also follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Murder Mitten Kittens BC for clips, updates, and behind the scenes content. Alrighty, kittens. I'll see you next time.